How would you describe the differences between the regulatory cultures in the US and in the European Union?
I'd begin by saying that one shouldn't talk about the European Union because it still is a cluster of member states that have their own regulatory cultures to some extent. A pan-European culture is only emerging, and one can ask, is that looking more German or more French or more British? It's probably not British, but anyway. But that said, there are differences in political cultures between Europe and the US. And I would say that the key differences have to do with what is expected of the state, what kinds of risks people are willing to put up with, and what expectations they have about what to do when something goes wrong. These are all big differences transatlantically, and they account for differences in regulatory approaches as well.
Which are, from your point of view, the most sensitive areas of public policy which need to be safeguarded in the TTIP negotiations on regulatory cooperation?
My own view is that democratic choices are the fundamental thing that needs to be protected, because very often what manifests itself as a technical difference, a difference in the use of models or the particular numbers that one is getting for the impact of trade negotiations, if you probe deeply enough, it goes back to these expectations I was talking about before that have to do with what people expect of their relationship with their ruling authorities. I mean, so it becomes a question of democracy, and I do think that all these nations have been experimenting with forms of democracy for a very long time, and we should show respect to choices that people have made.
Thinking about regulatory institutions, it seems that democratic participation has been diminishing already during the last 2 decades or so. How would you assess the potential role of TTIP for the politics of regulation in the future?
I think that the economic regulatory instruments, for whatever reason, have generated very little politics. I don't know exactly why this is. In a sense, the more technical domains of things like climate governance and other forms of environmental regulation have actually caused people to sit up and get more political than these economic regulatory instruments. So I think that the first thing to think about is how more people can begin to see that economic policy, which includes trade regulations, is a place where there should be much more political engagement. One of the things I found interesting about this conference so far is that I've met a range of people who are working precisely on that. They have different ideas for how to get the politics going, but there has been this tendency to believe that bureaucratic rationality does not need any kind of supervision, and efficiency is its own god, and so you don't need to pull that out into the light of day. But when you probe, all of these policies rest on the same problems that I know from other areas of regulation that I work on, such as environment. There are modeling problems, there are metrics, what are you measuring, with what, there are accuracy problems, and there are inclusion problems. If you don't frame the issue right, you're not going to get the right opinions or the right data. So all of that, I think, needs to be brought into the light of day, and that requires public awareness of the necessity for a politics behind the technical decision-making.
In what way do negotiations on TTIP taking place behind closed doors show a danger for representative democracy?
Well, I think you've answered the question yourself. Anything that happens behind closed doors is always in danger of not being held to the norms of representative democracy. I think going beyond that, there's always a question when experts sit down to negotiate, who are they really representing? There isn't any theory about this. That is, we don't have a global theory of who should be participating in economic policy. We talk about the civil society in general. We know that there are concerned groups out there, but there isn't a process like we have for electoral politics. There isn't such a thing as a political party structure that aggregates views and then brings them into a room. On the whole, this is also a problem that there is a discourse of bad science, bad economics, which allows people to exclude certain voices as not belonging in the technical decision making. This is something that I think needs to be investigated. We have a concept in social studies of science called boundary work. And this refers to the practices by which experts decide what is sitting inside the boundary of the sciences and what is sitting outside. Now, it has been demonstrated over and over that whoever gets to do that boundary work exercises a lot of political power. And sometimes that boundary work is nothing more than interest protection or self-protection. So those are the kinds of moments when people decide who should be in the room and who should not be in the room, where accountability is needed. I mean, give an explanation for why and let people judge for themselves if that explanation holds.